Hello everyone, I'm Shikha Malhotra and today I'm going to be covering a topic which is a very core topic to our computer organization, which is about the memory. We know memory is a very important component of the computers and we need to understand the requirement, the different kinds of memory, how, what kind of memory is chosen, the criteria for all that, maybe the speed, maybe the capacity, maybe the organization. So let's all cover this in our today's session. So starting with how I would want to introduce computer memory to you, it's a very basic and a fundamental component where we know we store data on it. Not only data, we also store the instructions which are used for running a computer. We can all compare it with the memory that we use on our mobiles nowadays. We are also looking forward to having a mobile which has a higher memory and a faster speed. So don't forget, your mobile is also a smaller version of the computers that we have been using all this while. Now with years we've seen that the speed and the memory capacity of a computer or maybe a mobile has gone up day by day and the cost has been reducing. So how's that been possible? So looking to that, we will first start with what are the functions that a memory does. I'll just reiterate, it stores the data and the instructions which are important for a computer to do the operations that we ask it to perform for us. The information that could be stored there enables our central processing unit to access the information from there and perform the tasks that we are asking our computer to perform for us. So let's go ahead with what is it categorized as. I have discussed a very minimal amount of categorization because the more details we go into, it requires a complete session for that. So let's just start looking at a primary memory and a secondary memory division. Primary memory, or it's usually called as a random access memory, we are also using cache as a primary memory these days, is the memory which is the fastest of all, and it has temporary storage for all the processes that are currently running on it. Remember, that is the reason why it becomes faster for it to process whatever we've asked it to do. A secondary storage device, which could be a hard drive or any of the SSDs, which are usually external, have a long-term data storage, and that is what we do in our day-to-day activity. We store any additional information or data or a secondary storage device or a peripheral device, which could be a hard disk also, which you and I use at home very regularly. These are used for long-term storage because we would want to retain that information for a longer period, yet not wanting to utilize the entire storage that is available on our system. The efficiency and the speed of a computer actually depends on the capacity of the memory and the hierarchy that we follow. Again, coming back to the same point, memory capacity is what we are looking at enhancing year on year with the newer models of the computers or even mobiles that come across. Looking at the characteristics that we need to understand about any memory system. So I have pointed out 8 of these most important aspects, basis which our understanding about a memory system becomes absolutely crystal clear. Let's take at the very first one, which is the location. Now, what is important in location? As I said, it could be an internal memory or an external one. So what goes on to the internal and what goes on to the external storage is something that we choose on. Looking at location, your central processing unit or any other processor that might be there on the system is the internal memory. We also have the cache as an internal. Why I specifically mention cache here? Because that is something that we use day in and out and very often, and that is a part of the system design where we have been able to achieve the faster speed. External, as I have already mentioned it earlier also, are the secondary storage devices. It could be any peripheral storage device that you are using. So automatically, anything that is stored on the internal storage device or an internal memory is closer because it's on the system, and it becomes easier and faster to access that information from there because it's there on the system yourself. Whereas the external or the secondary storage device is definitely outside your basic computer and has to be connected whenever we want to use it. Coming at the capacity, when we talk about the internal storage, we usually mention it in the terms of word size, which is your basic storage capacity or the basic unit for measuring a capacity for a computer and the memory. When we talk about words, these are a combination of bytes together, and usually a structure of 8 or 16 or 32 bytes is what usually we look at the internal. Whereas when we talk about external capacity, we've seen devices going as high as number of gigabytes or terabytes. These are the units that are very commonly used as we go in higher capacity of the external storage devices. Unit of transfer. When we talk about storing something in the memory, we obviously don't store it for keeping it there permanently. We also use it from there. We will retrieve it from there, do the action that we are expecting the system to do for us, and save it back to the system. So there is going to be some transfer, some exchange of data. When we talk about the internal transfer, we are usually using the data bus for it because that's where the data gets transferred. Now this depends on the number of lines that are there on the data bus. Hence, it is governed by the width of the data bus because the number of lines is usually equal to the capacity of the bits that can be transferred on that. Coming to external devices, as I just mentioned, we usually look at blocks which are much larger than a word, and it can go as high as the capacity that the device is getting used. Coming to the addressable units, what is the smallest unit that we should be able to address? So remember, the smallest addressable unit can be as small as the bit also. Though we do not use it to that level, we usually use it to bytes or to words. So the common formula that is used for addressing this is, let's assume A is the length is of an address that identifies where your data is stored in the memory in terms of bits. N is the number of the addressable units. So 2 to the power A is equal to N is the easy calculation for us to identify the number of addressable units that we are going to be using. The next method is, we have just talked about unit of transfer. So we are storing something, we are going to retrieve it, read it, write it, and we will have some exchange of data in the system. Definitely there has to be methodology that is going to be used to access that data. Whether it is going to be used directly from the location where it is stored, or there's some other methodology that we are going to apply, we definitely have some methods to be followed. Let's look at the most simplest one, which is the sequential method. We all understand the sequential method. It's used in multiple other places in our day-to-day life also. That is, we follow the sequence in which the data has been stored. So looking at that, we start at the beginning, we read through the way it has been saved. So number 1, then number 2, followed by number 3, number 4, and so on. That's a sequence that we follow. Now if that is how we are going to access the part where the memory has been saved, followed in a sequence, the address number that we have allocated it, we are going to be using the sequential method. Now if I have to look for something that is saved on address number 5, we will have to go through address 1, then 2, followed by 3, 4, unless we reach address number 5, which means that the access time to reach to 5 actually depends on the location of the data and where the read-write head of the system was located, which is the previous location, which means that if the read-write head was located at address number 3, to get to address number 5 will be a very small time. However, if we were at location number 10, to come back to address number 5, we still need the read-write head needs to go through the entire sequence and restart from 1 again to get to address location number 5. So that's where the importance of where the location is of the data that we are looking for. However, this may seem very simple, but it's not very frequently used because the access time here is pretty high and is also dependent on the location where the data we are looking for is saved. This is usually or was usually used in devices like magnetic tapes, which we don't use very often nowadays. And another reason why the sequential has been not so preferred is we are going for faster and faster access methods because we want larger memory to be used and the fastest access time to be made available. So, sequential doesn't take up a very important position there. Moving to the next one, it's called the direct access method. Now, the disadvantage of the sequential method is what is being removed from here in the direct access method. So, what do we do here? We look at the blocks with their unique addresses. Each block we know has a unique address. So, what the system does it reaches in the vicinity of that address and then beyond that goes on searching sequentially. So, let us assume we are looking at address number 205. So, initially it will jump to address maybe let us assume 200 and then go for a sequential search to 201, 2, 3 and then 4 up to 5. So, it is a combination of a jump followed by a sequential search. So, it is not necessary to go to 200, it could go to 203, 204, minimizing the sequential search activity, because we just discussed sequential search takes longer. So, we would want to reduce that, remove away the disadvantage. However, since we are not aware within the block where is that address saved, so some part of the sequential search cannot be ignored. How does it compare with the sequential form in the terms of access time? Now, again, the access time here would depend on the location and the previous location. So, again it's going to be variable because when we jump to a block, the first address could be the very first address that you are looking for, or the address that you are looking for could be towards the end. So, a part of sequential search would still take on some more time. Yes, the magnetic disks were using this type of method to access the information that was saved on them. Coming to the third one, we reduced the disadvantages of the first, which is sequential, as we move to the direct, and a little bit of the disadvantage of the direct because it also involved some amount of sequential search in it, by getting to this third method, which is called as the random method. Random, we know, as the name suggests, it is no method that is followed. So, we individually address, we identify the exact location, and that is where access time is independent of the location or the previous access. So, wherever the read-write head could be, it will directly jump to the location that we are looking for. So, there is literally no access time lost in reaching the location that we were looking for. The random access memory, that is the name also suggests, use this method, and that is why this kind of memory has become popular and is being utilized for faster access of the data that has been stored with us. Coming to another one, which is the fourth or the last kind, which doesn't relate to the address of where the content of my data is saved. It depends completely on the content of the portion that is saved there, which means that we are not looking at the address. Unlike the first three, here we are looking at the content of the data that we are looking for. That data could be stored in any location. We will start comparing the data for what we are searching with the data at the locations that is saved, and as soon as we find a common match, that address is identified. So, what do we do? The data is located by the comparison of the content of the portion of that is stored there. Here again, the access time is independent of the location or the previous access. As we are not looking at the address, we are only looking at the content of the portion that we are looking for. And cache is the best example which uses this kind of access methodology. So, you will just sum up 4 kinds of accesses that we have learned about. The first one was sequential, taking the highest time. Second was direct. Third was random. And the fourth is associative. The first three look at the address of the content that we are looking for. The fourth one, associative, actually looks at the content of the data we are looking for. Next aspect that we keep in mind when we are looking at a memory is its performance. We started off with the faster the memory is what we are all looking for in today's time. So the performance has to be highest. How do we look at this? We look at the access time. We've seen the different ways of accessing the information just now, and we've already decided, or we've understood, that the sequential takes the highest time, whereas the associative or even the random ones take a little lesser time. So if access time is so important, how do we either reduce it or minimize that? Because that enhances the performance of the type of memory that we are using. So the time between presenting the address and getting the valid data is called as the access time, which means when you start searching for something, the minute you start searching for it and as soon as you retrieve the data, that entire time is called as the access time. Obviously, it is varying for a random access memory versus a non-random access memory. We just understood if it's a sequential storage device, it automatically cannot use a random access methodology. So the storage device also has a part to play in it, and that's how the access methodology is applied to it. We got to introduce a new concept here which is called as a memory cycle time. Now this applies only for the random access devices or the random access memory, because this involves a little additional time. This is the time which is required for the memory to recover before the next access, which means that if you have just accessed something, it may be still recovering from or finishing the task before the next task is asked to be done. So before it finishes the first task and starts the next search task, there is a gap there, and that could be a minimal, yet that adds to the cycle time. So cycle time is actually a time which is used for the access to the information and additional recovery time it needs to move from one activity to the other activity. So when we are talking of nanoseconds today, even few nanoseconds actually adds to the efficiency or to the performance of that type of memory. Looking at the transfer rate, which is a part of the performance, rate at which the data can be transferred in and out of the memory unit. How fast the information is, the message is sent for searching the information, it is accessed from wherever it was stored, with whatever access methodology was being followed, and then retrieving it and giving it back to the user. All this put together takes the transfer rate. So that is how fast the system can do, the total time that it takes for either searching for something and retrieving it back, or while we are wanting to save some information for it to access an address location where it could be saved, writing it there and the control being transferred back is a total transfer rate. The next aspect we all look at is the type of the devices that we use. I just mentioned that the access type also depends on the type of the device that we are using, because some devices are used specifically for a typical kind of access device. Like I mentioned, a magnetic tape. Now, magnetic tape is a sequential storage device and it can use only a sequential access method. So, similarly, any random access method, the device that it could be using, let's say a semiconductor device, they're all random access devices, they will be using a random access methodology. We have the computer disks or the CDs and the DVDs, of course not very popular nowadays, yet they had a different method of accessing the information. What is getting very popular these days are the magneto-optical devices. So depending on what type of device are we using and what storage type it has, the storage retrieval or the memory access will also be dependent on that. physical characteristics, it cannot be ignored, because bases, again, whether it's a random access memory, it's only a read-only memory, or what is the kind of memory we are using, whether it's a volatile memory or it can be erased and reused, it varies with that. Now let's understand what volatility means. For any memory that we are using here, if the device or the memory that we are using keeps the stored content on it even when the electric power is not available, is called as a non-volatile, whereas a volatile is the one in which it tends to lose the data which was saved on it when there is no electric power that is attached to it. So imagine that every time that you have worked on something and it gets lost while the electric consumption or the electric power is not available, will have to be redone every time. So we of course do not use these kind of devices so often, yet it also depends that the content is going to be saved temporarily or permanently. Next comes the erasable type, which is obviously by our choice. Erasable means that I have saved it, it can stay on it, and whenever I want to rewrite, I erase the older content and rewrite something on top of it. So it can be erased by different methodologies, and we are not going into those details right now, but the concept is we are able to rewrite over something that was permanently saved on it with the devices, with methodologies which help us. So obviously that memory has to support the method of getting erased. So if it's not something that can be erased, then you are just adding on the content, and you will have multiple storage utilities where the content just keeps getting added and cannot be erased. Lastly, the organization of the bits onto the system. How much data are we saving? How much data, what format are we saving? And also, what is the arrangement of us retrieving that data back? So if I am saving in bits to form words, which is the normal methodology, which is a very common method these days, we always want it to be retrieved back also in terms of words. So when we are using something which is an interleaved memory, that doesn't become very obvious. So keep that in mind while we decide for what kind of memory are we going to use. We also need to be aware what is the basic unit of transfer, what method of saving are we going to use, what is my device that is going to be associated. Automatically all these things will fall in line with that. When we talk about choosing the device, we mentioned that what kind of storage device are we using. I would like to have a device, or any one of us would like to have a device which has the highest memory and has the fastest speed. Of course, the money part or the cost part cannot be ignored. So how do we choose that? Do we want bigger storage? The more is the storage capacity, we might have to spend more money on it, and automatically it may have lesser speed of retrieval of the data. So how much money are we about to spend on it, or do not really consider the money part of it? We are more concerned about the access rate, which is how fast I can access. So you might ignore one aspect so that the other one, which is more important to us, is taken care. So we usually juggle between these three: the capacity, the speed, and how expensive that memory is coming for us. So these three help us choose what is the kind of memory we are going to utilize for our systems. Let's look at the basic structure here. If you look at this pyramid, this is a memory hierarchy, a very generic pyramid which is broader at the bottom and obviously narrows down at the tip. Bottom is broad because that normally explicitly explains you that is the storage capacity. So at the bottom we have the highest storage capacity. Now when we have the highest storage capacity, we know we are going to put in a lot of content there. Whichever methodology we are using, searching data from there is going to take longer. So let's assume we have storage capacity for number of kilobytes there, then imagine the data that could have stored there, and if I have to pull out some number of bytes from there, it would be from a larger content that is saved there. The higher we go, the narrower it becomes, which means that the storage capacity is reducing, so automatically the retrieval rate will become faster because lesser data has been saved. So we are going to look up for something from the lesser storage that we have there. So automatically this becomes a little faster. At the topmost, we have the smallest section, which means the smallest storage, fastest access, yet it's going to be the costliest. So let's look at the way we go about it. Decreasing cost per bit as we go down the hierarchy, increasing the capacity, increase in the access time, and the frequency of access of the memory also decreases as we go down the hierarchy. This is what I just explained to you. We have to always keep in mind something called as a concept, which is locality of reference, which means that when the computer program is trying to access for a portion of memory, it starts looking up for something repeatedly. Let's take an example of a loop or maybe an array. When there is a loop running in your program, it tends to locate or look up for the data in a continuous format till the time the loop is not finished, and it's accessing the same set of address locations over and over again. So if we have a locality of reference to be kept in mind, this is a concept we use in designing much more efficient memories, and for that we usually use a cache memory. The hierarchy list, registers being at the topmost, the smallest and the fastest, whereas a magnetic tape being the largest in capacity, obviously the slowest in the access rate. This is a comparative table of how the cache memory, the main memory and the secondary memory can be compared each other on the basis of most of the aspects that we've discussed: the speed, the capacity, the cost, the visibility, the volatility, the access mode, the cycle time, right up to the function and the purpose of each one of them. And this is a very clear indication that cache memory is a fastest, of course a little costlier, and the easiest method to look for our content that is saved somewhere. So we will start looking at the cache memory in details in the next section.